They told me not to come. Not in so many words, of course. That would have required courage. Instead, I got a message from my son at 5:46 p.m., just hours before the dinner. "Hey, Mom, maybe sit this one out? The vibe's a bit more modern crowd tonight. Hope you understand." I read it 3 times. Sit this one out. As if I were a substitute player in someone else's game. As if I hadn't paid the mortgage on that house he lived in, hadn't helped with the down payment when he and Jessa couldn't get approved on their own. As if I were some relic they kept in the attic, useful but embarrassing. I didn't reply. What was there to say? I sat down in the quiet of my kitchen, the same one where I'd reheated late-night bottles, scrubbed tiny sneakers after muddy adventures, and cooked every holiday meal until Jessa decided she preferred catering. I looked around. The paint was old, the wallpaper peeling in one corner, but everything here had been done with care. My hands, my money, my time, my life. And now I was too much for the guest list. Outside, the neighborhood was slipping into dusk. The porch light flickered on. I could almost hear my late husband Ray's voice in my head, soft but firm. "Don't let them push you off your own porch, Lil." He'd said that once, after a fight with our boy. I don't even remember what it was about. But Ray had always seen things clearly. Clearer than I did, often. I got up and went to the drawer near the fridge. Pulled out the folder marked Caleb, my son's name written in block letters in my neat, old-fashioned script. Inside were copies of everything: checks, transfers, signed guarantees. The down payment, yes, but also the emergency loan when they totaled the Subaru, the private school fees for Micah and Nolan, the refinished hardwood floors Jessa couldn't live without. All of it. Every dollar. It made quite a pile. I spread them out on the kitchen table. The receipts looked like an archaeological dig of my silence, layer upon layer of just helping, only temporary. What's a mother for? And not once, not one time, had they asked me how I was doing. Not since Ray died 7 years ago. Not since I'd had to learn how to do taxes alone, how to winterize the house, how to carry groceries up the stairs with a bad hip. I looked at the clock. 6:11 p.m. They'd be setting the table about now. That big reclaimed wood thing I'd chipped in for. A statement piece, Jessa had called it. A statement, indeed. And tonight, it would say, "We've moved on from the woman who made us." I could almost see them in that sleek, open-plan dining room. Jessa's friends from the firm, her boss with his 2 white teeth. Caleb pouring wine, pretending he wasn't raised by someone who used coupons and patched socks. Laughing a little too hard at something clever, a joke I wouldn't have understood. And maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't fit in. But the thing was, I bought the goddamn chairs they'd be sitting on. I turned off the kitchen light and sat in the dark a while, letting the quiet thicken around me. No anger, no tears. Just a stillness I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes before a storm or a decision. Let them have their dinner. I wasn't going to fight for a chair at a table I paid for. I was going to do something else. Something better. I didn't sleep that night. Not from rage. No. Rage burns too hot, too fast. What I felt was colder, slower, like a frost setting in across familiar ground. I lay in bed listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the occasional creak of the house settling. My house. My name still on the deed of Caleb's. Mine too, technically, though I'd let that detail fade into the background. That was always my mistake, making myself smaller for their comfort. At dawn, I got up and made tea. The kind Ray used to call boot polish, because I steeped it strong. I took it to the kitchen table, sat down in front of the pile of receipts and statements I hadn't put away. The morning light made them look even starker, so many years reduced to paper and ink. I reached for a pen and a pad, started a list, not to remember but to see, really see, what I'd done. Down payment on their house, $78,000 kitchen remodel, Jess's dream kitchen, $26,500 Micah's summer coding camp, 3 years, $12,000 Nolan's orthodontics, $6,200 emergency fund after Caleb lost his job, $10,000 lease buyout on Jess's old car, $5,300 in private school application consultant, $3,800. That wasn't even half of it. And still I'd been asked not to come, told to sit this one out like a high school substitute teacher. My hands didn't shake as I wrote. I felt calm, sharper than I'd felt in a long time, like my brain had clicked back into gear after years of soft blur. I took another sip of tea and opened my laptop. I logged into my bank accounts. The numbers were still strong. I wasn't broke, not by a long shot. I had enough for comfort, for emergencies, for whatever came next. One of the accounts, the joint one I'd set up years ago to help Caleb manage his budgeting, caught my eye. There it was, recurring payments, mortgage, car insurance, utilities, subscriptions, even a landscaping service. I clicked through each line slowly, one by one. Each one a tether, a silent yes I'd whispered when I should have said no. I opened another tab and started a draft email to my financial advisor. Simple, direct. Please initiate the process to remove Caleb McRae from all joint accounts. I also wish to suspend all automatic payments associated with his household. I will come in person tomorrow morning to complete necessary paperwork. I reread it twice, then hit send. I thought I'd feel guilt. I didn't. Just clarity. It was still early. The town hadn't woken up. The garbage truck rumbled down the block. Birds started to chirp in the maple outside. I sat back in my chair, feeling something loosen inside me. A knot that had lived in my chest for years. The phone rang around 9 wow. Caleb's name lit up the screen. I let it ring. A message came in 10 minutes later. Hey Mom, just checking in. Hope everything's okay. Let's chat soon. Still so polished. So careful. He always used let's, like it made things more mutual. Another message followed at noon, this time from Jessa. Hey Lillian, just heard from Caleb. He's a bit worried. You haven't responded. Everything all right? I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled out another folder, this one labeled Wills and Legal. Ray and I had done the paperwork together, back when Caleb was a teenager. Simple. Everything to him. It had made sense at the time. Now, the sight of that signature, his father's name next to mine, made me pause. It was time to rewrite things. If I was no longer welcome at their table, then my money wasn't welcome at theirs either. I opened a fresh notepad, wrote a new name at the top. Emma May Thompson. My granddaughter. My light. 17 years old and already more thoughtful than the rest of them put together. She called me last week just to ask what book I was reading. Nobody does that. I began to make a plan. Not out of spite, but something firmer. Justice, maybe. Or self-respect. Ray always said I had a quiet steel in me. I'd just never used it on our son. But now I would. The next morning, I arrived at the bank 15 minutes before it opened. I wore my navy wool coat, the one Ray always said made me look like I ran the whole county. It didn't matter that it was a little out of style. It still fit. And more importantly, it still held me the way I needed. Upright. Decisive. The young man behind the glass doors looked up from his desk when I knocked. He smiled politely, but I could tell he didn't recognize me. That was fine. I wasn't here to be remembered. I was here to be understood. At 9 sharp, they unlocked the door. Mrs. McRae, The receptionist greeted me after checking the appointment log. "Mr. Langdon will be with you shortly." I nodded and sat down in the waiting area. I didn't fidget. I didn't read a magazine. I waited the way old women are expected to, quietly, patiently. But inside, I was bracing for everything to change. Mr. Langdon came out a moment later, a thin man with a tidy grey beard and glasses that pinched the bridge of his nose. "Mrs. McRae," he said, shaking my hand. "So nice to see you again. Right this way." We walked to his office. He gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. "I got your email," he began, folding his hands. "And I just want to make sure I understand everything correctly before we proceed." I looked him in the eye. "You understood perfectly. I want Caleb removed from the joint accounts. I want all automatic payments suspended. And I want to begin the process of transferring my investments into a trust for my granddaughter, Emma May." There was a slight pause. Not hesitation, just the silence of a man adjusting his expectations. "All right," he said after a beat. "We can absolutely do that. There will be some documents to sign, of course, and you'll need to name a trustee for the fund." "That'll be me," I said, "until Emma turns 25. Then she can handle it herself." He nodded again and started tapping on his keyboard. I watched him in silence. The clack of the keys was almost musical, like punctuation to a long overdue sentence. As he printed the forms, he glanced at me. "If I may ask, has something happened?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, something finally happened." He didn't press further. Good man. We spent an hour going through the paperwork, page after page, signature after signature. My hands were steady, my voice clear. By the end of it, there was no more joint anything. Caleb was no longer tied to my accounts. The house payments? Done. Car insurance? Cancelled. Landscaping, tutoring, meal boxes, all of it stopped at the source. When we finished, Mr. Langdon stood and shook my hand again. "It's been an honour working with you, Mrs. McRae. And for what it's worth, I think Emma May is a very lucky girl." I nodded, my throat tightening just a little. "She's the only one who still knocks before she comes into my house." I left the bank and walked 2 blocks to the law office. My lawyer, Marianne Hughes, was a small woman with silver curls and sharp eyes. We'd known each other since the days when I still had a joint grocery list with Ray. "I need to change my will," I said as soon as I sat down. She didn't flinch. "All right, tell me what's changing." "Everything," I said. And I meant it. Caleb would get nothing. Not out of spite. I wasn't going to spend another breath punishing him. He just wasn't part of my future anymore. Not in the legal sense, not in the personal one. By noon, we had a draft. Emma May would inherit everything. The house, the savings, even Ray's old war medals. The items I knew she'd treasure, not sell. I walked out into the crisp winter air, feeling something strange. Not anger, not pride, relief. I'd finally acted like someone who owned the house, and the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was mine. The calls started around 2 p.m. First it was Caleb, of course. A single ring, then another, then a voice message I didn't bother to open. Then came the text. "Mum, did you change something with the bank? The mortgage payment bounced. Please call me." I placed the phone face down on the kitchen table. He waited less than 15 minutes before trying again. This time, the message was longer. "Mum, I don't know what's going on, but our power bill auto draft didn't go through either. Jessa is freaking out. Just, please, can you pick up?" I turned off the ringer and made myself a sandwich. I ate slowly, methodically. White bread, sharp cheddar, A single slice of tomato. Just the way I'd made it for Ray on quiet afternoons. No background noise, no television, no apology. By 3:30, Jessa joined the chorus. Her message was clipped and formal. Lillian, I understand there may be a miscommunication about the financial arrangements. We're happy to discuss this openly and maturely. Can we find a time to talk? It was the maturely that nearly made me laugh, as though cutting me from their lives one dinner at a time had been the grown-up thing to do, as though brushing me aside wasn't childish in its own right. I rinsed my plate and set it gently in the rack. That's when I heard the car door outside. I stepped to the window and saw Caleb climbing out of his SUV, the one I'd helped him lease 2 summers ago. He was on the phone, with Jessa, no doubt. And from the look on his face, he wasn't here to deliver flowers. I didn't go to the door. I let him knock. Once. Twice. Then louder. Mum? It's me. I really need to talk to you. I opened it just wide enough to look him in the eye. He looked tired, frustrated, not angry, not yet, but close. Come in, I said quietly. He walked past me like he still lived here, sat at the kitchen table like he always had. I stayed standing. Something's wrong, he began. With the accounts. The bank says the authorizations have been revoked. I nodded. He blinked. Did you do that? Yes. But why? You didn't say anything. We didn't. You told me not to come, I said. My voice was even. That I wouldn't fit the vibe. Caleb flushed. It wasn't meant like that. How was it meant? He looked down at his hands, fingers pressed together like a child in trouble. It was just a misunderstanding. Jessa thought. I don't care what Jessa thought, I said, my voice rising just enough to cut the air. This isn't about a dinner. It's about the fact that you've been treating me like a silent wallet with no face for years. And when it came time to choose between your wife's embarrassment and your mother's dignity, you made your choice. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Caleb, I continued, softer now. I've loved you since before you had a name. I've given more than any person should ever have to give. But I am done financing people who don't see me, who don't ask how I am, who don't think I have the right to sit at my own table. His jaw tensed. But the kids, they need school. We've got payments. Jessa's business. I know. And you'll handle it, I said, like grown-ups. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time in years. There was fear in his eyes now, not for me, but for everything he'd come to rely on without question. You can't just pull out like this. I can, I said, and I have. I pulled the signed bank forms from the drawer and slid them across the table. These are copies. I've also changed my will. You're no longer listed. Everything goes to Emma. His mouth opened, then closed again. His shoulders sank. You're serious? Dead serious, I said. You told me to act my age, so I did. We stared at each other. 2 people with the same eyes, the same chin, the same history. He stood slowly, folding the papers. Is there any chance, he asked, voice quiet, you'll change your mind? Is there any chance you'll change how you treat people? He didn't answer. He walked to the door without another word. When it shut behind him, the silence felt clean. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. That night, I slept without waking once. No pain in my hips, no restless thoughts chasing themselves around my skull. Just sleep. Deep, quiet, dreamless. When I opened my eyes at 6:15, I didn't feel 77. I felt clean. I moved through my morning slowly, washed the dishes, watered the plants, took a second to smell the lemon balm on the windowsill, which I always told myself I'd use for tea and never did. Until now. The kettle had just begun to whistle when a soft knock came at the door. It wasn't rushed, not Caleb's, not Jessa's. I opened it to find Emma standing on the porch, holding a paper bag. "Brought you muffins," she said, eyes flicking up at me like she wasn't sure if she'd be turned away too. "Blueberry. I didn't have walnuts." I stepped aside and let her in without a word. She walked into the kitchen like she used to when she was little, light on her feet, cautious but hopeful. I poured the tea. She opened the bag. "I heard," she said, settling across from me. "Dad came home yesterday looking like he'd aged 10 years. I raised an eyebrow. He told Mom he might have miscalculated. That's all he said. She started crying. Micah locked himself in his room. I sipped my tea. "And you?" "I waited until this morning. I didn't want to come over while you were still deciding things." That made me smile. She'd always known when to give space, when to speak, when to wait. She hadn't inherited that from her parents. That was her own. "I'm not mad at you," I said softly. "I know," she replied. "But they will be, if they find out I'm here." "They already did," I said. "They'll be madder when they find out you're listed as sole heir." Her eyes widened. "Wait, what?" I pushed the legal draft across the table. She read the heading, blinked, and looked up at me. "Grandma." "It's done," I said. "You're the only one who ever asked about my health, who ever came by without needing something. I don't care what they think. This isn't revenge. It's clarity." She was quiet for a long time, staring at the document like it might burn through the table. "I don't want to take anything from them," she said finally. "You're not," I replied. "They gave it up the moment they decided I was optional." She nodded, then looked away. "I don't know what to do." "You live your life," I said. "You go to college, you study hard, you fall in love or you don't. But you don't let anyone ever tell you you're only valuable when you're useful to them, not even me." She looked back at me then, eyes full and shining. "Can I still come over?" "Anytime," I said. "You don't even need to bring muffins." She smiled, and for a moment I saw her as a little girl again, the one who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms and ask what the sky was angry about. She left an hour later with the bag of documents tucked under her arm like a shield. When she was gone, I stood in the middle of my kitchen, wondering what to do next. It was only then that I realized how quiet the house felt. Not lonely, not empty, just still, as if it were waiting. For once, it wasn't waiting on Caleb's requests or Jessa's demands or another invoice with my name on it. It was waiting on me. I went to the closet, pulled down the worn leather suitcase Ray and I had taken on our one and only trip to Colorado. It still smelled faintly of cedar. I placed it on the bed, unzipped it, and started to pack. Because I knew what came next. And this time, I wouldn't be sitting anything out. The next 3 days passed in an almost perfect quiet. No one came to the house, no one rang the doorbell. But the phone rang non-stop. First Caleb, then Jessa, then Micah. Bless his anxious teenage heart, probably put up to it. Voicemails, texts, emails, all in variations of the same tone, confused concern, masking panic. I didn't answer a single one. They shifted quickly, as I knew they would. The first day was soft. "Mum, just let us explain." The second, "This doesn't make sense. You're acting out of character." And by the third, "We need to talk about what you've done. It's irresponsible to make legal changes in a state like this." A state like what? Clarity? I turned off the phone entirely on the evening of day 3. I left it in the drawer next to the kitchen phone book I hadn't touched in years. Instead, I sat by the window with a cup of mint tea and watched the street settle into dusk. I hadn't realized how much I missed the sound of wind through the dry maple leaves. That whistle. That small rustle of something shifting. I thought about Ray again, as I often did when the house got this still. I imagined him sitting across from me, arms folded, that amused expression he'd wear when someone tried to talk circles around him. "They thought I'd cave," I said aloud. He didn't answer, of course, but I could almost see his mouth twitch. I went upstairs to the guest room that night. It had always been meant for Emma, though she never stayed long. School, friends, her father's rules. I'd kept it tidy, the bed made, the books she liked lined up on the shelf. I stood there a while, thinking. And then, without really knowing why, I opened the closet and pulled out a box I hadn't touched in over a decade. Letters, old receipts, postcards. A baby blanket Caleb had used long ago, before he could talk, before he could lie. I took it all out, piece by piece. Held it, weighed it. And then I packed only what mattered. In the morning I baked a pie, apple, with cinnamon, for Emma. I didn't plan to deliver it, just to have it ready, for the day she'd show up again. By noon, the silence had settled so thick around the house it was like a second skin. Until the knock came. Not Caleb, not Jessa. Emma. Again. She stood on the porch in jeans and a flannel shirt, cheeks flushed, no bag this time, no paperwork. "Thought I'd check in?" she said, lifting a hand. "Also, the silence from Dad's end is loud." I let her in. The pie was still warm. We sat and ate without speaking for a while. The crust turned out flaky, the apples soft, but not mushy. Ray would have approved. After a while, Emma looked up. "Do you feel okay?" "I feel free," I said. She nodded like she understood. "They're still trying to figure out how serious you are." I smiled. "Then they've never really known me." Emma laughed softly. "No, they haven't." After she left, I returned to the guest room and zipped the suitcase closed. Not because I was running, but because when you stop being someone's afterthought, you start choosing where your story goes. And mine was about to go somewhere new. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving, not because I wanted to be dramatic. There was no grand revenge, no curtain call. I simply didn't owe them an announcement. For the first time in decades, I was making a move that didn't require anyone's permission. Not Caleb's, not Jessa's, not even Emma's. This wasn't about them anymore. I booked a small coastal rental in Maine. 2 weeks. Nothing fancy, but it had a porch that looked out on the sea and an old iron kettle already waiting on the stove in the photos. That was all I needed. That, and the right to sit somewhere no one could ask me for anything. I left a note for Emma, tucked under the pie plate. "Back in 2 weeks. If you need anything, you have the number to my lawyer. If anyone else asks, you don't know where I am. Love, Grandma." I packed only what I needed: clothes, a book, my tea tin, and a photo of Ray, the one from our road trip to Tennessee, where he's squinting into the sun and smiling like he knew something no one else did. The drive was long, but I didn't mind. I had a podcast playing, nothing deep, just people talking about gardening and antique restoration. Normal, simple voices, the kind that filled a space without taking too much of it. Somewhere around the New Hampshire border, my phone buzzed in the glove box. I let it. I wasn't pulling over. Let them worry. I stopped only once, at a roadside diner. Ordered eggs and toast and ate slowly, ignoring the glances from couples and families and groups. A woman eating alone often makes people uncomfortable, like we're a symptom of something they don't want to catch. But I wasn't alone. Not really. I had every version of myself seated at that table. The young mother who worked double shifts, the widow who signed papers alone, the grandmother who watched her name vanish from invitations. We all ate together. We all agreed. It was time. I arrived just after sunset. The rental was exactly as promised, old, wood-framed, with paint peeling on the shutters and a porch that groaned under my weight. Inside, it smelled faintly of salt and cedar. I opened the windows, lit a lamp, and boiled water. That first night, I sat out on the porch wrapped in a blanket, listening to the sea. It didn't sound like I expected, not waves crashing, more like breathing, in, out, patient, timeless. I realized then how long it had been since I had heard anything that didn't want something from me. No lists, no reminders, no passive-aggressive sighs, just wind, water, and my own quiet bones. I slept better than I had since Ray died. The next morning, I walked barefoot across the cold kitchen tiles and made tea. I didn't check my phone. I didn't make a to-do list. I opened a book I'd meant to read for years and started at page 1. And when I heard the seagulls outside start squabbling over some scrap in the surf, I laughed. Out loud. Alone. And I didn't feel foolish for it. I felt real. By day 3, I'd already stopped counting. Because peace doesn't announce itself. It just begins. On the 5th day, it rained. Not the polite kind of rain we get back home. Not a light drizzle on the porch roof while you read. This was a coastal storm. Sharp. Heavy. Wind that slapped the windows like it wanted to be let in. I stayed inside, wrapped in a thick wool sweater I hadn't worn in years. It still smelled faintly of lavender sachets from the cedar chest. I made soup. Not for anyone else. Just for me. Carrots, lentils, a dash of cumin. It bubbled slowly on the old stove, warming the tiny kitchen with more than just heat. It felt like something I hadn't made in years. Care, without condition. I sat at the table with my bowl and my book, and for hours I read. No interruptions, no guilt. Around 3 o'clock, the storm softened. The rain still tapped on the windows, but the wind had lost interest. I set the book aside and opened my notebook, the small one I'd tucked into my bag on instinct. I hadn't written in it since Ray passed. The first thing I wrote wasn't a journal entry. It was a question. When did I stop being a person and start being a resource? It startled me a little. Not the question itself, but how quickly my hand had written it. As if I'd been holding it in for years. Below it, I listed moments. When Caleb started calling only after missed payments. When Jessa stopped saying thank you. When no one asked how my days were, only what I could cover. I didn't write these things in anger. Just fact, as a witness. Next, I wrote something else. What would I have done with my life if I'd known I was allowed to live it? That one I stared at for a long time. The question felt too big for the page. I didn't have answers. Not yet. But I did have the sense that it wasn't too late. That night, I lit a candle on the windowsill and sat by it until the wax burned low. I wasn't waiting for anyone to come find me. They wouldn't. And that was fine, because something was shifting. Not in them. In me. I didn't need to be invited anymore. Not to dinners, not to birthdays, not even to their futures. I'd RSVP'd to my own. Finally. The next morning, the sky was clear. Cold air. Clean as paper. I took a walk down the slope toward the beach, my boots crunching over gravel and pine needles. The sea was glassy. Still. I found a piece of driftwood that reminded me of the handle of Ray's old toolbox, the one he never let Caleb touch until he was old enough to respect it. Funny, how much of Ray I still carried with me. I sat on a large stone near the edge of the shore, watching the water for a long time. And I knew something then, not just in my head, in my bones. I had outlived the part of my life where I needed to be needed. Now I would live the part where I simply was. No justification, no permission, just me, Lillian McRae. And that was more than enough. It was the 7th day when I turned the phone back on. Not because I missed anyone, but because I was ready to hear what they'd done in my absence. There's a difference. I waited until I'd made tea, sat on the porch, and watched the light shift on the water. I gave the moment the respect it deserved. Then I opened the drawer, pulled out the phone, and pressed the power button like someone turning on a light in a room they no longer feared. 46 missed calls, 12 voicemails, 7 texts from Caleb, 5 from Jessa, 1, only 1, from Emma. I didn't listen to the messages, not yet. I scrolled through the text previews. Caleb's were scattered in tone. "Please, Mum, just talk to me. This is getting out of hand. You've put us in a really bad position financially. Jessa says we should call the lawyer, but I told her you'd come around." That one made me laugh. Jessa's texts were more polished, as always. "We're willing to revisit the terms if you'll agree to a more structured approach to family support." Structured approach. They still thought this was a negotiation. Emma's message was simple. "Hope the sea's treating you well. I told them I don't know where you are. I'll keep saying that. Miss you." That's all she wrote. And it was all I needed. I didn't write back, not yet. I wanted to hold the stillness of this place just a bit longer. I wasn't done letting the silence do the work, but I was ready to see what my absence had revealed. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into Caleb's Homeowners Association website. Back when I helped them buy the house, I had access to everything. Bills, notices, newsletters. He'd never changed the login. It was all still there. The newest update caught my eye. Delinquency warning, HOA fees unpaid, 60 days past due. Another notice. Upcoming lien process if balance not cleared. I checked the utilities. One of the services, their home security system, had already been suspended. So, they'd leaned harder than I thought. I didn't feel triumphant, just done. This wasn't about punishment. It was a mirror. I had simply stopped holding it up for them, and now they had to look on their own. Later that day, I received an email from my lawyer, Marianne. "All documentation processed. Emma's trust is now active. The will is updated and legally binding. Let me know if you want to add any specific provisions." I read it twice. Let the words settle. Legally binding, irreversible, freeing. That night, I cooked myself a small dinner. Potatoes roasted in butter and rosemary, a bit of fish. A meal made with both hands, not in a rush, not for anyone else. I opened the last voicemail on the phone just before bed. It was Caleb's voice, soft, unsure. "Mum, I don't know what to say anymore. I'm sorry. I guess I always thought you'd just be there, like you always were. I didn't think it would ever really change." A pause. "I didn't realize until now how much you were holding us up, and how little we ever held you back." Another pause, then quieter. "Please come home." But that was the thing, wasn't it? I already was. On the 10th morning, I did what I hadn't done in over 40 years. I stood in front of a mirror and asked myself what I wanted to wear. Not what was practical, not what wouldn't offend, not what Jessa might roll her eyes at, or what Caleb would describe as not quite the vibe. Just what I liked. The wind outside had quieted, but the sea was still moving, still breathing against the rocks like some old, tired animal. I put on my softest blouse, the one with tiny embroidered flowers at the collar, slipped on my best shoes. They were modest, but they made me stand taller. Then I picked up the phone and called Marianne, my lawyer. "I'm ready," I told her. "For?" "To finalize the deed transfer. The house, I'm not going back." There was a pause on her end. She knew me well enough by now not to argue. "I'll get the papers in order." "And Marianne," I added, "list it, as soon as you can. Whatever doesn't go to Emma can go to someone who wants a home, not a throne." She gave a soft laugh. "Understood." After the call, I stood at the edge of the porch and let the sea wind hit my face. I wasn't running. I was stepping out of a structure that had held me hostage in politeness for too long. I'd been the woman who bought the chairs, the table, the groceries, and still asked, "May I sit here?" No more. At noon, the email came in. The listing agreement for the house. I signed it with a digital signature, as neat as if I'd done it with my own pen at the kitchen table. Caleb would find out soon enough. He'd see the for sale sign go up, or maybe Jessa would get the alert on one of her real estate apps. I didn't need to tell them. Not out of cruelty, but because it simply wasn't theirs to know first anymore. That evening, I went into town. Just a small grocery stop. Bread, cheese, apples. But I took my time. I browsed. I smiled at the young cashier who complimented my scarf. "You look like you're going somewhere," she said. "I am," I replied. "Everywhere I couldn't before." I came home, made a small plate, poured a glass of wine, and sat out watching the last sliver of sun slide beneath the water. I let myself feel it. That mixture of sorrow and release. The ache of cutting away a root that had gone rotten deep underground. Later that night, Emma texted. "They found out. Dad's losing his mind. Jessa's trying to say you're having a breakdown. I didn't say anything. Just so you know. I'm proud of you." I stared at the screen a long time, then wrote back. "They always told me to act my age, so I did. I acted like a woman who owns her life and won't rent it to the ungrateful anymore." She replied with just 3 words. "You're my hero." That night, I didn't cry. I'd already wept enough, quietly, into casseroles, into birthday cards sent without a thank you, into lonely Sundays. I didn't owe the tears anymore. Now I owed myself the truth. And the truth was this. I was done being manageable. From here on, I would be magnificent. The next morning brought a knock. Not gentle, not curious. A knock with shoulders in it. Heavy, impatient. The kind of knock that says I'm not here to visit. I'm here to reclaim something I think I own. I already knew who it was. I opened the door slowly. Caleb stood there, winded like he'd jogged from the car. His coat flapped open, hair uncombed, the lines around his mouth drawn tight with panic. Behind him, the gravel of the rental's driveway bore fresh tire tracks. So they'd found me. Or more likely, he'd guessed. I always did talk about the sea when I wanted to disappear. He didn't smile. "Mom? Caleb?" We stood there a moment. The wind pressed against us, tugging at my sleeves. I didn't invite him in. Not yet. "I drove all night," he said, like it explained something. "You should have called. I might have left." That's what I was afraid of. I stepped aside and let him in, not out of kindness, out of curiosity. He looked around the cottage like it was a crime scene, like he didn't recognize a version of me that didn't orbit him. "This is where you've been. This is where I've remembered how to breathe." He sat down heavily at the small table by the window. The same place I'd been sitting just hours ago, eating toast and reading a novel for no one's benefit but mine. Why are you selling the house? Because it isn't home anymore. But it's ours. No, I said, pouring tea. It was mine. You just stopped noticing that. He didn't speak, just stared at his hands that looked so much like Ray's when he was young, but Ray had never clenched them into fists when he didn't get his way. You didn't have to go this far, Caleb finally said. We could have talked. I tried to talk, I said. Every time I said I was tired. Every time I asked to be invited instead of added. Every time I helped, then waited for some trace of gratitude that never came. That was me trying. He rubbed a hand over his face. Jessa says you're having a late-life crisis. I am, I said. But it's not the kind she means. I'm in crisis over how long I let myself disappear. His eyes found mine. And for a second, just a flicker, I saw something like regret. You raised me to think I could rely on you. No, I said. I raised you to think you could become someone others could rely on. You skipped that part. Silence. Even the wind outside had quieted. I didn't know it got this bad. That's the point, Caleb. You never asked. He stood slowly, like the weight of it all had finally settled into his spine. He walked to the window and looked out toward the sea, hands deep in his coat pockets. What now? He asked quietly. Now you go home, I said. And you learn what it means to build a life without expecting someone else to keep the lights on. He turned. And us? Me and you? That depends on you, I said. Not on what you want. On what you're willing to face, to change. And if not, well, I'll be fine. You're the one who's never had to learn how to be alone. He stared at me, something closing behind his eyes. You're not going to budge on this, are you? No, I said. Not this time. At the door, he paused. Emma knew, didn't she? Yes, I said. She kept it to herself. Because unlike the rest of you, she knows how to hold something precious without breaking it. He nodded once, left without another word. When the car disappeared down the road, I poured another cup of tea. The air in the cottage was still warm, and nothing in me wished he'd stayed. The fallout came fast. By the next morning, Jessa had taken over the airwaves, or at least my inbox, emails, texts, voicemails, some civil, some not. She had a tone like polished steel, elegant, cold, and dangerous if you held it wrong. Most of her messages sounded rehearsed, as if she were reading from a script drafted by someone with a law degree and a shallow grasp of shame. Lillian, this has all been very destabilizing for our family. The financial impact is significant, and the emotional toll is considerable. I imagined her sitting in their spotless kitchen, carefully choosing words that might get me to fold. We all make mistakes in how we express appreciation, but love doesn't disappear overnight, and family deserves forgiveness. And my personal favorite, please don't let a generational misunderstanding destroy what we've built together. What we'd built? As if I hadn't paid for the blueprints, the lumber, the roof, and the damn insulation, only to be told not to track in mud on the welcome mat. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally understood the value of silence. A woman who says nothing after you've wronged her is more dangerous than one who screams. That afternoon, Marianne sent another email, a short one. Offer received on the house, above asking. Ready to proceed when you are. I stared at the screen, then at the waves beyond the porch. The house that held my life for 50 years would soon belong to someone else. The kitchen where I taught Caleb to whisk eggs, the garden I planted with Ray, the bedroom I'd wept in alone. All of it, soon, no longer mine. I thought I'd feel loss, but I felt something else. Relief. Let them hold the memories if they want. I'd carried them long enough, and they were heavy. Later, the phone rang again. I picked it up out of habit, not looking at the screen. Grandma? Emma. I softened immediately. Hi, darling. They're still spiraling, she said. Dad's been pacing around like he's preparing for a deposition. Mum's started talking about intervention strategies. I think she read some blog on how to talk to irrational parents. That made me laugh. Actually laugh. A sharp, sudden sound I hadn't heard from my own throat in months. Irrational, I said. Well, that's new. I was always too reasonable, remember? Always available. Always agreeable. They're not used to you having lines they can't cross, she said quietly. No, I agreed, but I'm getting very good at drawing them. There was a pause. Then, soft and steady, I want you to know. I don't want your money. I love you whether I'm in your will or not. I know, I said. That's why you are. She didn't speak, and I let the silence hang. Warm this time, not cold. After we hung up, I sat on the porch and watched the sun go down again. The sea didn't care who I'd raised. Didn't care about betrayals or inheritance or late-night accusations. The sea just kept breathing. I realized, as the last light vanished behind the water, that I'd done something I once thought impossible. I had let go of the house, of the weight, of the myth that if I just gave a little more, they'd finally see me. Now, I had nothing left to prove, and everything left to live. The papers came in the next morning. An envelope, thick and official-looking, waiting on the porch table where I now took most of my breakfasts. Inside, the sale contract. Clean, straightforward. Full offer, no contingencies. A young couple from Vermont, expecting their first child. They loved the porch, the garden, the quiet street. They'd seen something in that house that Caleb and Jessa never did. Potential that didn't come with strings. I signed every page with steady hands. No ceremony, no tears, just ink and truth. Afterward, I walked down to the rocks where the sea met the edge of the town, sat on my usual bench, and let the wind find its way into my sleeves. It was colder now, late October already, and the gulls had thinned out. The sun was quieter. The sky held more grey. Still, it felt good. Honest. I had spent most of my life bracing for someone else's storms, financial, emotional, imagined. Now I was letting the weather touch me without flinching. There was nothing left they could take. I'd already given it all away. And then, finally, reclaimed myself. That evening I packed again. Not for return, but for departure. I left behind the little rental just as I'd found it. Clean sheets, folded towels, a half-full jar of tea on the shelf. I'd arranged for a storage company to take the last of my boxes, the few things I still wanted. My books, my letters, the quilt Ray's mother had made when we got married. Everything else? Let it stay, or let it go. By morning, I was back in the car, heading toward the next quiet. I had no forwarding address, just a small map with circles drawn in red. Towns I'd always meant to see, but never had the time or the right kind of permission. Now I had both. Somewhere around noon, I stopped at a rest area to stretch my legs. I sipped weak coffee from a paper cup and watched a young couple struggle to soothe a crying baby. The mother looked exhausted. The father was trying, but clearly flustered. I caught the mother's eye for a second, gave her the kind of nod only older women can give. The one that says, "You're doing better than you think." She nodded back, weary but grateful. For a moment, I thought about walking over, offering help, advice, maybe just an extra pair of hands. But I didn't. Not because I didn't care. but because I was learning, finally, that not every need is mine to fill. And that was its own kind of peace. In the late afternoon, I checked into a roadside inn in a small town I'd never heard of. The room was plain: a bed, a desk, a window facing pine trees. But the sheets were clean, and the silence was deep. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out the notebook I'd started by the sea, and opened to a blank page. At the top, I wrote, "What would it look like to live without apology?" Then I began to write. Not about Caleb, not about Jessa, not about Emma, though I knew I'd call her tomorrow and tell her where I was, what came next. I wrote about the sound of my own voice, the weight of my name said out loud, with no explanation behind it, the feel of my life, mine, when no one else was trying to rent it by the month. The doorbell rang just once that night, around 8. A man from reception, dropping off a local paper. "No one reads these anymore," he said with a shrug. "But I always think someone might." "Someone did," I said, taking it from him. After he left, I unfolded the paper and skimmed the pages. On the third to last page was a quote, printed in the margin of an article about local artists. It read, "She remembered who she was, and the game changed." I smiled, folded the paper, and left it right there, open on the desk, for the next woman to find. The sun was rising when I opened the window. It wasn't a dramatic sunrise, no pink streaks or golden floods, just a pale light creeping over the trees, quiet and firm, like a woman entering a room she'd once been told to leave. It felt familiar. I made coffee with the little machine in the corner, burnt my tongue slightly and didn't mind. The room was cold, but I liked that. It kept me alert, honest. By noon, I'd walked the whole length of the town twice. It was a place with creaky sidewalks and old benches, the kind of town where people waved even if they didn't know you. I stopped in a bookstore and bought a novel I'd never heard of. I asked the owner what it was about. He said, "A woman who doesn't apologize for wanting peace." I laughed out loud. Back at the inn, I took my time packing. I wasn't in a rush. I had nowhere urgent to be. Just another circle on the map, another quiet place to breathe. I left the room key on the desk with a note. Room clean. Window left open. I like the air. Thanks for the stillness. And then I was on the road again. I didn't turn on music. I let the hum of the tires and the thrum of my thoughts carry me. That's when I realized, for the first time in years, maybe decades, I wasn't anticipating the next obligation. I wasn't mentally preparing for someone's disappointment. I wasn't translating my feelings into something more palatable. I was just driving, just living, just. Somewhere past a long stretch of pine and a crooked fence, I pulled over at a tiny overlook with a rusted sign that read, "Point of Grace." I don't know why. Maybe the name called to me. I stepped out and stood at the edge. Below, a lake shimmered like a mirror left too long in the sun. No waves, no drama, just calm. And I said, out loud, "Thank you." To whom I didn't know. Myself, maybe. Or Ray. Or whatever small, tired god might have been waiting for me to stop being everyone else's emergency contact. Later, I checked my phone. A single text from Emma. "Where are you now?" I sent a photo. The lake, the sign, my hand holding a coffee cup with chipped enamel. She replied, "Looks like freedom." It did. I didn't answer Caleb's latest email. I didn't respond to Jessa's attempt to rebuild with guidelines. I didn't need to anymore. Some bridges are not burned. They're simply no longer on your map. That evening, I found a new rental by the coast. Another cottage. White shutters. A porch that creaked just right. The owner handed me the key, looked me over once and said, "Staying long?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe just until I forget how often I used to say yes when I meant no." He chuckled. "Well, we've got room for that." I unpacked slowly, hung up only one dress, stacked my books, placed Ray's photo by the bed. I stood looking at it a while. "You were right," I whispered. "They did try to push me off the porch. But I didn't fall." I turned off the light and opened the window again. The night air came in sharp, with the promise of rain. It smelled like newness. And I let it in. Tomorrow, I would write Emma a letter, a proper one, the kind you keep. I'd tell her the truth, not just what happened, but how it felt, what it meant to take your own name back after years of signing it away. But tonight? Tonight I'd sleep in a room with no ghosts, only grace. I mailed the letter the next morning. Cream-coloured paper, my oldest fountain pen, and every word pressed with the care of someone who finally believed her voice mattered. It wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. I told Emma the truth, that I wasn't angry anymore, not really. That anger had been a flare, something bright and hot to burn through the fog. But underneath it had always been something quieter. Sadness, maybe, or exhaustion. The kind that comes from loving people who've forgotten how to look you in the eye unless they want something. I told her. She gave me hope. Not in the easy, sentimental way, but in the way her presence never demanded, in the way she listened, in the way she never asked me to shrink. And then I told her the part no one else would have understood, that it took me nearly 8 decades to realize that love and silence aren't the same thing, that kindness isn't currency, and that a woman who owns the house is allowed to lock the damn door and rest. I mailed it from the post office in town, then stopped by the market for a small cake, just for me. I picked one with strawberries on top, even though Ray had never liked strawberries. That was the point. By the time I got back to the cottage, a storm had begun, soft at first, then steadier, rain drumming on the roof like a memory, not painful, just persistent. I made tea, sat by the window, and thought about the long road behind me. Not just the physical one, not the highways, not the miles, but the road of no. All the times I hadn't said it when I should have. No, I can't come watch the kids again on 0 notice. No, I won't co-sign that refinance you knew you couldn't handle. No, you don't get to forget Mother's Day and call it just a silly date. No, I won't sit quietly at the edge of your life like a spare part. I used to think saying no meant giving up on people. Now I know. Sometimes saying no is how you remember yourself. The rain picked up. A chill moved through the room. I lit a fire in the small hearth and watched it catch. The flames took their time, but once they rose, they didn't flicker nervously. They knew what they were. That's when I wrote the final line of the notebook I'd carried since the sea. They told me to act my age, so I did. I acted like a woman who remembers what she's worth and won't discount it anymore. I closed the notebook, placed it in the drawer beside the bed, and for the first time in my long, long life, I spoke this truth aloud to an empty room. I was never just support, not just a helper, not just a provider, not just the one who cleaned up after other people's storms. I was the roof, the floor, the walls, and I am still standing, always was, always will be.